Agriculture is the backbone of Kenya's economy and just generally African economies. But in the recent past, food production has been something that has been a kind of a challenge and putting a question about the region's food security. In studio, I'm joined by Julius Nyabicha, who's the manager from Minjingu Mines and Fertilizer. Perhaps to start off, Julius, is in the whole equation of food security, where have the Kenyan governments in the East African region gone wrong in terms of addressing the issues around food security?
Thank you, Michael, for having me in studio.
Yeah.
Food security is a very important topic, and generally it has to be factored in agriculture. And the governments of the East African community countries are trying their level best to ensure that food security is achieved. Tanzania has managed to achieve that. Right now, Kenya is importing a lot from Tanzania because Tanzania has achieved the food security in their country.
Yeah.
Kenya, not yet. When you look at food security, you really have to look at the factors of production. You have to look at fertilizer, which is a very important input in food security, in food production.
Yeah.
You have to look at the situation of water. If there isn't enough rainfall, then do we have enough irrigation schemes that we can then use in terms of irrigated agriculture? Then you also have to look at the seed. And finally, you have to look at these components, these inputs, on their sustainability, on their affordability to the farmer. Because many farmers in Kenya are not able to afford, for instance, the fertilizer. Not just affording the fertilizer, but many farmers in Kenya are not able to access the right fertilizer.
And I guess the challenge because of that is we don't have a local manufacturing plant for fertilizer. I know recently the Kenyan president has been out just looking for investors who would be able to set up. But in that whole equation of fertilizer, how key is it? Because right now we're just getting fertilizer at a bit costlier price, whereas in Tanzania you're able to cut all those costs and ensure that food production is high.
I remember last year the president of this country launched the soil survey report.
Yeah.
And the main situation was that this country, the soils are very acidic.
Yeah.
We need to redeem our soils. We need to put together mitigation measures to ensure that the soils, we reverse the acidity in our soils.
Yeah.
That is one. Two, the situation of fertilizer, we really have to customize the fertilizers in this country so that the farmers can be able to get the right fertilizer. You could be having a lot of fertilizer in the country. You can have cheap fertilizer in the country, but is it the right fertilizer? So that's why now the country, we are looking at, can we have a plant that can customize the straight fertilizers that we have in the market to be able to be used by the Kenyan farmer so that they are relevant to the Kenyan farmer, so that we make it soil specific in Kenya and also crop specific in Kenya. That is what Tanzania has done through Minjingu Mines and Fertilizer. Yeah. Because Minjingu Mines and Fertilizer is a company that does the mining of phosphate, and then secondly does the blending, so that the fertilizers that the company manufactures are customized and relevant to the crops in Tanzania and also to the soils in Tanzania. And that's why now the company is now starting to import to export to Kenya, so that this can also be relevant to the Kenyan farmers, because this is the same region. This is the East African region. So the relevance of our fertilizer has got to be taken into account, not just bringing any fertilizer, but ensuring that it is a fertilizer that is going to reverse the soil acidity problem in Kenya. It is a fertilizer that has got the relevant nutrients for the crops in Kenya, for the soils in Kenya, and it's also a fertilizer that is going to be affordable to the farmer, because you can have a very good technology, a very good fertilizer, but at the end of the day, if it's not affordable to the farmer, then it's not helping that farmer.
You raised the question about access, and I'm just looking at a country like in Nigeria where they removed even the whole supply chain of farm inputs, right from fertilizer to seeds, and it was moved to private sector hands. Is this something that perhaps should happen also in Kenya, where we remove kind of these inputs from being a central government issue, where now it's left into the hands of private sector players who are able to know this is what is needed where, and are in direct contact with farmers?
Probably you could be talking about subsidy, for instance. Yeah. There is no country in the world that has made significant strides in agriculture without subsidy. Yeah. So even these developed countries that you see actually have got a subsidy program. Nobody, even the private sector, we aren't against the subsidy program. But it has to be a subsidy program that's well administered, and the government really has to win off so that we've got the private sector taking off and being in charge even of the subsidy program, because the government is not in the business of selling fertilizer.
Yeah.
They're supposed to come up with the right policy, so that if this right policy is followed, then the private sector can be given the tender so that they can be able to supply the fertilizer through subsidy. That is important. Of course, even if the government came and invested in fertilizer production, it will not be sustainable in the long run. Finally, this has to be a business venture. It has to be taken up by the private sector, and at the end of the day, it has to be a sustainable and affordable technology that can get the fertilizer to the farmers at the right time, and the right fertilizer for that matter.
You've heard of investors who are coming in. So let's say Kenya sets up its own fertilizer plant in the next 2 to 5 years. How significant would that be for boosting up food production? Because now every year we come in and knock in the doors in Tanzania and asking people to ship in some maize for us. So how significant would that plant play in Kenya?
Very significant, because if it really takes off,
yeah,
it's going to be significant because the fertilizer is going to be available at the right time.
Yeah.
One of the challenges that we have had in this country is that sometimes the fertilizer is not there at the right time. Then we are going to have the right fertilizer. If it's going to be a blending fertilizer, of course, it has to be a blending fertilizer, because this country does not have the resources, the raw materials for manufacturing of fertilizer. So if we have to do the blending, then we have got to have the customized blending that will focus on different crops, on different soils, and also on different farm levels. You understand, in this country, for instance, the packaging of fertilizer is very significant. Yeah. 75% of food production in this country is through the small-scale farmers. And these small-scale farmers sometimes need fertilizer in 5 kilo packs, in 10 kilo packs, 25 kilo packs, and also in 50 kilo packs. So all these issues, when we put them together, they've got to be looked at in a very specific, holistic manner. Secondly, when we talk about setting up a plant, Tanzania has a plant, Mijingu Mines and Fertilizer, which does... It's a resource-based company which does manufacturing and mining of phosphates, and then we take the phosphates and blend with the rest of the nutrients like nitrogen and potassium, so that we can have a full blended fertilizer that is well focused in the region and through research. Of course, when you are in fertilizer, yeah, you've got to rely so much on research. You have to partner with the research institutions. You have to partner with seed companies, because at the end of the day, what the farmer needs is a technology that can be able to put food and money in his pockets. So sometimes we focus so much, for instance, on seed. If you have so much focus on seed and you don't have focus on soil fertility, at the end of the day, you don't harvest. And if you have so much focus on let's say, fertilizer, that is soil fertility, and there's no good seed, the right seed, at the end of the day,
it will be an effort in futility.
It will be an effort in futility, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Julius Nyabicha, thank you very much for that input. Now you've heard from Julius Nyabicha from Mijingu Mines and Fertilizer in Tanzania, just about the farm inputs that are required just to ensure that we boost food production and ensure that Kenya has food security. And I hand you over back to Nancy Kachungira, who has some interesting news about GMO.